everybody. Welcome. Nice to see you. Tucked in the dark theater on such a bright day, but escaping the heat maybe. So I'm Carrie. I'm from Reconciliation Saskatoon, and we're really happy to bring you this event today. It comes from the brainchild of our learning committee, and I'll talk a little bit about Reconciliation Saskatoon and the work that we do later. But before we begin, as always, we invite knowledge keepers and leaders and elders to lead us in a good way. And today we have a real treat. Senator Nora Cummings is a proud descendant of the Round Prairie Métis settlement just south of Saskatoon. She's a mother of 9, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and a mentor to so many people in our community. Nora has promoted Métis culture and rights for her entire life. As the founder of the Saskatchewan Native Women's Association, she's also been involved in the creation of several other organizations, the Gabriel Dumont Local 11 and the Native Women's Association of Canada. Thank you for joining us, Nora.
Put this down for short people. Thank you, and it's an honor for me to come here today. This is my side of the town. For 85 years I lived on this side of town. I was just telling them that I was 7 years old when this place opened, and my uncle and my aunt brought me here. I don't know what the movie was because I don't remember. Good afternoon, Creator. I thank you for giving us this opportunity to come here today with so many wonderful people. Creator, it is so nice that you have guided us and brought our people and so many people together. I ask you, Creator, to continue to watch over each and every one of us, our families and our loved ones. I ask for prayers for the people that are suffering across our world. I ask you for prayers for those seniors, people, for their family. I ask you for our prayers for our people in homelessness, our young people. And I ask and pray for you to continue to watch over our families and our loved ones. And guard our young people and all of our people. And bring each and every one of us, no matter who we are, what race, creed, or color. We are all your creation, Creator. Keep us safe and keep us together. And let us all work together so we'll become better families and also that we'll have a better country. Thank you, Lord Creator, for that day. Amen.
Well, Reconciliation Saskatoon is a collective of over 100 now businesses, organizations, nonprofits, faith communities who all come together and try and get more people engaged in a journey of truth and reconciliation. And so we have many different working groups focused on different areas of truth and reconciliation. We've got a business engagement group, we've got a Two-Spirit action group, newcomer engagement group, and we have a great learning committee. And the learning committee has wanted to have this conversation for a long time, so we're really grateful that all of you are participating by showing up and that we have David Garneau with us today. Part of the work that we do is always guided by a vision for reconciliation that was developed when thousands of people across Saskatchewan were asked one question. When truth and reconciliation has been successful, what does it look like? The OTC, Office of the Treaty Commissioner, led that project, and through that work and countless conversations with community members and knowledge keepers and residential school survivors, they came up with 4 pillars. a shared understanding of our history, vibrant cultures and worldviews, systems that benefit us all, and authentic relationships. And I think that there's something in this talk that will hit on most of those points. And I bring that here because we often talk about the issues that we have to face, but let's also keep in our mind, in our hearts, in our hands, in our action, a vision for where we want to end up. So with that, I'm going to introduce the longest standing member of our learning committee. What a jerk I am, hey? April Sora from the city of Saskatoon to introduce David Garneau.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'm glad you didn't say the oldest. But it's an honor and a privilege, really, to be here. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming out today. Like Carrie said, it's a gorgeous day out there, and we're just so pleased. We've been talking about having this discussion for a long time. My name is April Sora. I'm the Immigration, Diversity, and Inclusion Consultant with the City of Saskatoon. It's my great privilege also to sit on the Naming Advisory Committee with my colleague Angela Daigneault, who is also here today. She's the Indigenous Inclusion Consultant. And we take our role very, very seriously on that committee. Our role is to bring the voices to that table that often aren't heard. Naming, to me, has always been very close to my heart. I'm third generation Japanese Canadian, and I think, seeing yourself reflected in your community and in your world is so important. Naming, to me, is connected to language, which is connected to culture, which is connected to identity. And I think when you see yourself reflected in your community, it has such a great impact. And I think even more so because you know what it feels like to not be reflected in your community. And I think for many people, especially those coming from different ethnocultural groups, from immigrant families, you know the feeling of when you see that name, when you see, whether it's in credits of a movie or in an art gallery, or if I see to this day a Japanese name somewhere, I am running to talk to my auntie or my uncle or somebody to say, who is this and whose family are they from? And oh my God, Wakabayashi Way. When I first came to Saskatoon and saw Wakabayashi Way, it floored me that there was a Japanese name. There was a street named after somebody Japanese. So being on the naming committee is incredibly important to me. And I appreciate the opportunity. Kevin Kitchen, who is my manager, supports that in a great way. So with that, I'd like to, it is a great honor to be able to introduce David Garneau. We have talked about him for a long time in our learning committee and have wanted to bring him here. And I think this is the perfect time now for both the City of Saskatoon as well as our Learning Committee and Reconciliation Saskatoon. So with that, I'm just going to read his bio. David Garneau is head of visual arts at the University of Regina. He is a painter, curator, and critical art writer who engages creative expressions of Indigenous contemporary ways of being. Garneau co-curated the Contemporary Native Art Biennial in Montreal and large exhibitions at the National Museum of the American Indian, New York, the Campbelltown Art Centre, Sydney, Australia, and the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. He has given keynote talks in Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and throughout Canada on issues such as misappropriation, reconciliation, public art, museum displays, and Indigenous contemporary art. He recently installed a large public artwork, 544 paintings on the Tawatina Bridge in Edmonton, and this year was awarded the Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts Outstanding Achievement. And with that, it is my great honor to welcome to the stage Mr. David Garneau.
what you doing here? It's so nice outside. Thank you very much, Senator, for starting us off in a good way. And for Carrie, thank you for inviting me here to speak. I'm going to give a kind of an eccentric talk about naming and unnaming. First thing I want to show you is a map of Edmonton. I should say that I'm Métis from Edmonton. So I was born and raised also in Treaty 6, territory we're now on. Whoops. There we go. So this is a map of Edmonton in the 1880s. And the yellow bit is my great-great-grandparents, Laurent and Eleanor Garneau's river lot. The neighborhood still bears their name. And so the idea of naming and unnaming is very close to my heart. I'd hate to be erased. And I now live in Regina in Treaty 4. I will do a more fulsome land acknowledgement at the end of my talk, but before that, I want to consider this pot. Bear with me, bear with me. All right, so there's a long-standing debate in the art world, this craft art debate you might have heard about. And when I was thinking about this talk, this pot came to mind because I do a little lecture in an Art 100, which is an introduction to art class. And I've been doing this talk for almost 30 years now. And it centers on this idea of this pot and how is it that this is a work of art or is not a work of art. And so it's part of a larger debate, and that's the difference between works of art and mere real things. But for me, it's really an indigenous point of view. These things have a being, and so this is also about people and the difference between people and why we value some things more than other things and value some people more than other people. So everything in the art world is ranked. If you're an artist, you're going to hate what I'm about to say. There are indisputably amazing things at the top and weaker things at the bottom. Not everything that you make is going to end up in the Louvre. It might just end up in a local coffee shop, and you might be happy with that. That's fine. So the order shifts from time to time, right? Not everything that was exemplary in one generation is going to be thought to be absolutely wonderful the next generation. You might grudgingly understand that it really is a great thing, just not your great thing. So there is a shifting among these categories. But the idea of the categories, the hierarchy, remains. The first division we have to make, though, is between works of art and mere real things. So there are things, most things, that are not works of art at all. A sunset, for example, is beautiful, but it's not a work of art. In fact, beauty used to be a category that we thought all works of art shared, but not all of them do now, especially in the 20th century. So sunsets are not works of art because artworks, as a rule, are made by people. They're a form of communication between people, made by people for people. Now, there's a gray area in this ranking, this hierarchical ontology. Hierarchy means there's a ranking, and ontology is a study of being. So what is the beingness of this object? And if it's a work of art, how is it that it's more significant than a mere real thing? So what you should be thinking in the background as I'm talking about this analogy or metaphor is how is it that some names get on signs and some do not? So the status of this object depends on three key things, two of them of which I'm going to discuss. And this is the thought of Arthur Danto, who was a philosopher of art, and had the great good fortune to meet him not long before he died. I didn't kill him, but no. I felt bad, actually, and shared his wisdom and all that, and then he died. Didn't get a follow-up with a few questions. So here we have this object here. It's a handmade thing. It's a unique thing. So it's separated from other types of things. But what is it that makes it a work of art? Anybody want to venture a guess? I'm going to go into professorial mode here, the Socratic method. Yes? It's in the manner of Jack look at that glazing, right? Look at that foot. Yeah. So what she's describing is an ontology, right? Things that are valued. So good workmanship, or good personship, or good humanship. What is it? Why is it gender? Uh, yeah. And how do I know, if I don't have too much expertise, how do I know that it's a work of art? Or that, how do I know that intention is registered in the actual thing itself? Yeah, because those things are not works of art. They lack the intention. Who does? Yeah. Yeah. So it's the convention that we sign this. If we're a ceramist, it's a convention that we sign them. If I keep fiddling with this thing, we sign them. Mere real things, manufactured things like this by Wedgwood, just gets a stamp, and all the things are the same, and they all get the same stamp. This object, the person who made it is saying, this is different from those things, right? It's handmade, it's not manufactured, okay? And when they sign it, they're saying that this has value, almost like a painting, which would be signed. And certainly there are some people who won't sign it. I'm actually going to talk about that in a way, okay? What's the other way? So that's one way. This is not a work of art. You even said that the fellow you're talking about is a craftsperson. It's a work of craft. And that doesn't mean it's lesser than a work of art necessarily, though in some ontologies they would say it's lesser. This thing is not doing something. Well, first thing we need to do is we need to place it somewhere. If it's in my kitchen, if it's in my studio, it's not yet a work of art. It has to be displayed in some way in the art world. Okay, so here we have a photo with some shelves, and some of them are being used for plants, and other of them are used for display. When it becomes a work of visual art, then we accept it as a different way, even though it's the same darn thing. So person who's on that street name is what I want you to be thinking about. It's just a human being, but we are elevating them. So there's two ways of elevating this object. One is to sign it, and that's the intention that it's meant to be taken as something special. Don't put plants in it. Don't eat out of it, right? Then the second way is display, putting it in an art museum, putting it in a place that counts in the art world. That's the second way. And there's a third way, which you're going to laugh when you hear what it is, but this is absolutely foundational. What is the difference between an artwork and a mere real thing? Can anybody guess? The price. Not the price. Because a work of craft can be worth thousands of dollars. Right? This Jack Surus, if it was put next to one of his students' works, the Jack Surus would be worth more because it's a Jack Surus. Okay, but it's still a work of craft, not work of art yet. It's missing the key ingredient. Anybody? George. How it's used is the display part. How it's viewed, right? And not just any beholder. My grandmother looks at this and wants to eat her Cheerios out of it. Somebody else looks at it as an artwork. That's not a quality of the artwork. This is something that's a quality of the artwork that all artworks have and mere real things do not have. George. Still a work of craft. This is why I'm so loved as a prof. Still a work of craft. Come on, try harder. No. Okay, you're going to die when I tell you. The main thing separating a work of art from a mere real thing, other than the intention of signing it, which is saying I want it to be a work of art, other than the display, which is absolutely essential, a title. Danto, when he came up with this, blew the art world away. Oh, he's also the guy who invented the name Art World, Arthur Danto. He went to a show of Jackson Pollock's, and he saw these Brillo boxes, and he says, this is not art. He has a master's degree in art, in printmaking. He goes to see these things, and he says, this is not art. How is it? Then he is a philosopher, which he became. How is this art? And then he realized it's in an art gallery. Yes, it has the intention of being art. Great. But most importantly, it had a title. And the mere Brillo boxes did not have a title. It sounds silly, but as I'm going to be talking about, naming is one of the most important things we do. It elevates the status. It suggests that this is something different from a mere real thing. Okay, so a curator can rescue an object from mere real thingness. Here's some African pots that were never meant to be seen as artworks, but a curator can come in and present it as a work of art. But most works of art are designed for that status by their makers. Artists make things they're hoping will be accepted as works of art. And that is, as you were saying, that they're treated as works of art. So what does it mean to be treated as a work of art? How do we know that the artist's hopes and intentions were there from the beginning? And as we saw, signing the pot is one of the signal ways of saying, please, please accept this as something more significant, right? If you go to a flea market, you go to Valley Village and you see a signed pot versus an unsigned pot that look kind of similar, you know you've got some gold there, right? Whereas if you come across the Wedgwood stamp, you pull out your phone, Wedgwood, is this a good, oh no, it's not, it's a low end. Okay. So there's so here's Greg Pace, who's an absolutely wonderful ceramist. He sometimes calls himself a ceramic artist, but I went to his webpage just before coming here this afternoon, and he calls himself a potter. Even his sculptural works, he'll put a little hole in the top in order to make the thing possibly a vessel. For him, that's philosophically important, that he's seen as a potter first. Okay, so mere real things are unentitled to titles. Most crafters do not consider their works of art, and so do not title them. A title indicates a status above mere real things. It is also the main divider between works of art and other well-made human things. Here we have, this is Greg Pace again. I don't know if you know his work at all. He makes these vessels, and then the negative space in between, you can see a head there. Pretty exceptional ceramist. Paradox. So he's got two pairs of Doc Marten, or vases. In the middle there's Doc Marten feet, and it's called Paradox. Ceramists are well known for their sense of humor. But here he is. Look at this title. The Customs and the Spirit of the Nations, Occident. Okay, so now that's a serious title. That's saying, take me seriously. It's loaded with content. So a title is not just a namecation of meaning, right? So it takes it more than just a naming. So we're going to talk about that when we get to streets as well. So now some people will object and say, but we do name some things, right, that are not works of art. Some people will name their cars. So their car is not unique, it's not handmade, but it might be a customized car, it's rare, and so it may deserve a special status. And we use a word like antique or collectible as an elevated ranking for some previously mere real things. Okay, so even among those mere real things, there's a ranking. Some things in mint condition or not. And here we have a Subway sandwich artist. Okay, we use the word art and artist very loosely sometimes just to explain that this thing is more than a mere real sandwich, or you're more than a slave laborer working in Subway, right? So art is often a term used to claim a higher status. So it's aspirational, and we understand that it's a branding game not designed to be taken too seriously. So how important are names? Imagine bringing home a puppy, imagine not naming it. How many days could you go without naming that dog? I had a family friend, we had a cabin at the lake at Lachlan near Edmonton, and there was a family of 7 kids, and they couldn't agree on the name of the dog, so it was called My Dog, right? So each one would call, come on, my dog, my dog. It was all their dog, my dog. But we can't help but name it. Here's a painting by Lee Krasner. So in the middle of the last century, some non-objective painters and sculptors such as Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner and people who went to Emma Lake didn't want viewers to associate their work with anything from nature. They gave some of their work numbers or used the word untitled. Numbers and untitled are non-title titles. They avoid ascribing meaning, but they're there to show that the artist still wants their work to be accepted as art. The convention is that all works of art must have titles. Not naming them would put that status at risk, so they'll still put a placeholder there. We don't give titles or names to mere real things. When we refuse to give unique names to some things, we are saying that those things do not deserve special treatment. Years ago, I helped a friend of my mom, her name was Judith Huang, who's long been deceased, but when she was in her 80s when we met, and she asked me to help her with a biography. And she had a very colorful life, including running a women's prison in China in the 1950s. And she told me that she was not giving her name until she was 2 years old. Why would she not be given her name until she was 2 years old, do you think? Gender? Nope, boys too didn't get their names yet. 2 years. I had to double check this as a fact. It's not only in China in the 19-teens this happened. 19-teens, yeah. Oh, yeah, so absolutely. In a lot of indigenous cultures, you're waiting. You're waiting for a sign. And then you get your name, and the name is meaningful according to some characteristic you might display or some event that might occur. 2 years, though. So it wasn't that in her case. So this is the turn of the last century? Yeah. Exactly. Shocking. So what does that mean? To wait till the person's viable, because the death rate was, I think it was 8 out of 10, something like that, 8 or 9 out of 10 weren't viable until 2 years. So why would you not name someone? That's a reason, but it's kind of a terrifying reason. It means you're not a human until you get that name. If you're raised Catholic and other religions, you get a late name later on, and then your real name, your confirmed name, your confirmation name. Say, I think it's in grade 6. Naming is one of the most important things we do. The moment of naming is the moment we acknowledge that a being is human and deserving of human rights. As we advance through life, we're given other names. Mr., Mrs., Senator, Professor. Saskatoon's naming policy is 14 pages long. This is not a casual thing. By page 6, you wonder how anything other than the name of a tree could make it through the process. Street naming says a great deal about a city, its maturity, its attitude toward risk, its history, its present living citizens, and our sense of the future. Streets in cities further east from here are nearly all named. On the prairies, many have numbers. Numbered streets, like numbered non-objective sculptures and paintings, is the barest type of naming. Numbers are functional. They differentiate one road from another, indicate an order, but they do not suggest character or culture other than a very institutional type of culture or attitude. They are untitled spaces waiting for names, waiting for worthy people or ideas to be named after. A number indicates that a thing exists, that it has a rank in some order. Such bare names suggests that the thing listed has no unique character, no meaning beyond utility. Numbering rather than naming is how industrialized societies dehumanize its subjects, its places, and also, of course, its enemies. This is an Inuit ID tag. Colonial Canadians, for example, having a difficult time pronouncing their names, gave Inuit numbers and made them wear identification discs. Soldiers are given dog tags. Prisoners are given numbers. And we all know of others who were tattooed with numbers so they could be dehumanized and controlled. Next level up from street numbers are neutral names and names with pleasant associations. Suburbs do this best. They often have names that are not descriptions of what is even present there. They are aspirational. They evoke what we wish were there or things that they now replace. Forest Drive, Deer Run, Fox Drive, etc. At the moment, we accept these names as inoffensive branding, a step up from numbers at least. Perhaps a future generation will be unable to bear the irony or timidity and come up with more meaningful names. The final level of street naming are names that require deep thinking, feeling, meetings, debates, long forms, processes, and time. They are proper nouns, the names of people, heroes, names meant to call to mind not just persons, but whole historical events, cherished values, etc. Like artwork titles, these street names evoke meaning. They are words designated to indicate the thoughts, feelings, and desires of a generation. Prior to 1947, there were thousands of lakes and islands and other geological features in northern Saskatchewan that were unnamed. Following World War II, the province named 3,700 of these features after Saskatchewan men who died in battle. From one point of view, it's called geo-memorialization, is a fitting tribute to those who gave their lives for our country. From another point of view, it is an obvious act of colonization. These names, settler English names, displace indigenous names and meanings for these territories. As an act of reconciliation, future generations may decide to restore indigenous names for these places. Public commemoration through naming is one of the most meaningful things we do. As I mentioned, Laurent and Eleanor Garneau, they were one of the few Métis people who were able to hold on to their script and cash it in for land. And they had a river lot in Edmonton. Then they moved out to St. Paul de Métis, which is a Métis ideal community at the turn of the century that Father Lacombe founded, and then gave up on because they burned down their residential school. And anyways, bad things happened. But Laurent and Eleanor were wealthy because they held on to their script. Imagine if other Métis hadn't been cheated out, we'd be living in a very different territory with very different names. So now I want to talk about my relationship with John A. Macdonald. So I grew up in Edmonton, and then when I was about 17, I moved to Calgary, and I lived there for about 22 years. And then I moved to Regina for the last 24 years. And when I moved to Regina, I decided to sort of get the lay of the land and walk around to get a sense of what kind of place this was. And I came across a place called Victoria Park in the middle of town, which should have been a warning right there of a colonial space. And I came across this metal dude. And most people would think nothing of it, but to me, I was shocked. Those of you who don't know, John A. Macdonald was not only the first Prime Minister of Canada, but also oversaw the execution of the Métis leader, Louis Riel, in Regina. There's no memorial to Louis Riel. There's a small plaque to his trial, the Louis Riel trial it's called, and it's right near it, so poor Louis Riel's plaque has to be stared at constantly by John A. Macdonald. But I was quite surprised, and I was surprised at my surprise. I'm a pretty logical person, and I didn't think that I would feel emotionally about it, but I did, that the executioner of Riel was actually honored in this place by the city, and not Riel, was a surprise to me. Let's just put it that way. It was a surprise. So what did I do? Every November 16th, I would go there early at night or first thing in the morning, and lay a noose at his feet. And it was just a private act. Sometimes there were little nooses, I draped over his arm. Other ones I put on his foot. Later on, I met the custodian who was cleaning them up, and I was wondering what the hell that was about. So I had an audience of precisely one. To increase the audience, you go to Walmart and buy little John A. MacDonald dolls, pry open the package, and stick in a little noose, and then put them back on the shelf. And it's not considered stealing. And I did this long before the TRC. I think I did this in 2008 or 2009. So then I was invited, because I had done these little private performances, I don't think I told anybody about it, but I was invited at one point to do a performance in Victoria Square. And I said, I know exactly what I want to do. I've been thinking about this for ages. And they have the Louis Riel trial, which is supposed to be a really terrific thing. I still have yet to go, but I know a lot of people that I respect, Bob Boyer and other First Nations Métis people have performed in this, so it's probably a respectful thing. But I got the costume designer, I forgot her first name, Caroso, to build me 2 jackets, so 2 suits. One is a felt suit, and the other one was a canvas suit. One was for winter. I was going to do performances in winter, and the other one is in summer. And what I imagined I was going to do was these little nooses that I made for John A. I was going to go to the airport, go to different events, and hand out these nooses, which have a tag on them that says, souvenir of Regina, the noose. And so I ended up spray painting the canvas one gold and wore the felt one for this performance. So I was invited by the Dunlop Art Gallery, which is right on Victoria Square in the library, and I did this performance. I won't take too much time with it. It was pretty elaborate. It took about 20 minutes or so. First thing you would hear, you'd see next to John A, a military drummer and a Métis drummer playing a hand drum. And I asked them to sort of riff off each other. And so the hand drummer was able to get loud, was able to get soft. The military drummer could sort of slow it down a little bit, but it was ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta. It was always aggressive. And in the end, which was really thoughtful, a real act of conciliation, was the tap drummer realized that they were being outclassed by the warm and soothing tones of my eldest kid and sort of backed off a little bit. So they played during the performance, and I came in from down the street, and I've got a whole bunch of money bags dragging behind me attached to my ankle. I'm carrying 3 sticks, long sticks, and a suitcase and a chair and some other stuff, tin can. And the money bags represent John A. paying off Louis Riel. And there really had to be a moment of atonement there where publicly Riel was acknowledging that he was being paid off by John A. MacDonald to stay in the States and not be a troublemaker. And I wanted that publicly noted, but also that he was freeing himself from that. So he unties the bags. So I'm wearing the felt suit, I've got a noose around my neck, and I've got a black crepe shawl over my head. And then I start petitioning John A. I don't speak at all during this performance, but I'm petitioning, I'm holding a scroll, I'm echoing exactly his pose. Then I'm reading, or pretending to read, miming the notion of reading this petition. And surprisingly, he's not listening. So I try other means. I take the long pole. I have a tin can telephone, and I'm talking to him, and then I'm listening, and I was listening really, really carefully. Nothing. I'm not getting anything. So then I have enough of that, and so then I put a Métis sash around his eyes because I don't want him to see what's going to happen next. So what happens in the second part of the performance is I turn my back on him, and I set up the sticks in a form of a teepee, and I create a little ceremony there. I take off my jacket, and I put it around the teepee, and then I'm wearing an Idle No More shirt. This is, I'm trying to remember, this is 2015, I think, about 7 years ago. And I'm doing a smudge in there. And so this is not for him to see. It's a private act. But also, I'm no longer Riel, right? I'm a descendant of Métis people. and I'm a contemporary person doing this smudge. And in fact, in the end, I phoned my wife to come pick me up. So I'm sort of breaking that fourth wall. I'm letting people know that I'm not Riel. I'm not pretending to be Riel. I'm not an actor. I'm Dave Garneau, dressed up in this way, trying to get some points across. And one of the major points is, I had, by the way, just prior to this, talked to Joe Fafard about making a Louis Riel sculpture and working with a Franco-Sasquatch friend of mine, Frederick Dupre. We were going through the process with the city, with Wascana Park Authority, province, figuring out what it would take, and it would take a lot. And in the end, though, I realized, no, I don't want to make a counter monument, a competing metal man. I want to turn my back on all of that, and more of an indigenous way as a living memorial, something you have to visit and embody all the time. And so I just leave the park. So I was also invited to do this performance at Kingston, and there's a beautiful sculpture of John A. there. And I got rid of the taps player. I just didn't feel that worked. So I had a hand drummer, Dana, hand drum for me. I don't have a picture of the statue, but he's up on a higher pedestal. And then for Canada's 150, I was invited to do the same performance in Ottawa. And I'm happy to report, not through my doings alone, of course, is that the statue of John A. in Regina was taken away, and the one in Kingston, which I never thought was taken away, that's John A.'s riding, was taken away. So, a street is a mere real thing. A commemorative street name at once recognizes the elevated status of a person being so honored and further elevates their status. It presents the person as exemplary, as someone to be admired and emulated. Every work of art has a title, but not all works of art have the same status. Most artworks remain in the artist's home or hang in other homes. A few end up at major art galleries. Very few get into the art history books. Everyone has a name. Not everyone's name is known beyond their community, and not everyone gets a street named after them. There's a ranking. We are very resistant to renaming streets. To do so is to suggest that things are more fluid than we wish them to be. Naming is a form of reification, that is, of making some temporary thing appear more permanent, more real. Public commemoration through naming is the highest form of symbolic extension of an individual human life. Such names persist beyond the person's body, even beyond more physical representations, such as statues and buildings. The only way artworks lose their basic status as artworks is if they can be proven to be forgeries, not what they appear to be. They can, however, also be demoted in the body of the museum. They can be warehoused and never shown. While many sexist and racist works, for example, remain on display in museums and art galleries, many more no longer see the light of day and are now rarely made or collected. So I was invited back by CBC to do another performance. I said, I don't want to, and then I remembered the summer suit. Oh, yes, I will. I came back, and this time I talked to, and this is just before they were being removed, a year or so before. I came in, did a talk, and this time I tried to coax John A. to join me in the museum. Whoop, sort of jumped ahead there. This is a good idea. Don't post on your Facebook page a thing like this. The cops show up. I guess I was being provocative. I wasn't going to spray paint them, but the cops showed up. But I actually, if you're going to do a performance like this, what I recommend doing is I got insurance and I got a permit. Artists don't normally do that, but I wanted to cover my ass. So here. So names chosen for commemoration as streets are people who the society of the time chose because they represent honorable qualities. They chose these people to reflect the values of the time and based on what they know about the person. If it is later shown that the once extraordinary person is no longer seen as exemplary, or more importantly, they represent values a subsequent citizenry no longer supports, those designations may be removed or replaced. So just as our ancestors expressed their ideals in street names, we also do so in our renaming. Clearly, replacing John A.'s name with a number would signal timidity, as would a neutral signifier, the name of a tree or an animal. A Cree word or name, a Michif word or name, would carry a clearer meaning and express at least aspirational desires for conciliation. If I stood here before you 20 years ago and began my talk by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 6 territory, you would have been puzzled. You may have had some sense of what this phrase means, but it would not radiate the heat of meaning that it does now. To open, as is the present vogue with a land acknowledgement, is to recognize that this place has many names, and by highlighting this one, Treaty 6, we foreground not only Indigenous presence, history, and meaning, but also acknowledge that those of you who are not First Nations, Inuit, or Métis are settlers. The heat of meaning. Names such as these are not neutral. They are accompanied by feelings, by emotional weight, by temperature, coolness, and warmness. Settler is a word that might cause a burning sensation precisely here, or a trembling in your left leg. The phrase Treaty 6 names you a settler, and that's unsettling. It's uncomfortable because it's probably not your chosen name. To accept the name settler requires substantial mental and emotional labor and a fine-tuning of the term that allows you to see it as a responsibility rather than a slur. Eventually, soon, that name will fade and be replaced by better ones like ally, neighbor, or my favorite when I bring these words up to people I consult in elders or knowledge keepers, particularly Cree in central Alberta or Blackfoot in southern Alberta. I asked them about these terms and they said, I think what you mean, David, is a real human being, right? That's what we aspire to be a real human being. So these are aspirational names, ally, neighbor, a real human being. They're things we try to live up to. The restoration of Indigenous names and the naming and renaming of once were colonial spaces as Indigenous will shape us all. I should say that last word there, I had to look it up and I was profoundly disappointed in my Métis colleagues up here. It just means a street that leads to a larger street. And the bridge that I worked on in Edmonton called Tuatana is Cree for valley. Come on, we can get a bit more imaginative than that. So that ends my talk, and I would love to have questions. Well, this city is fascinating, right? Because looking here, it begins with numbers and letters, and then important people's names, and then as you get to the nervous suburbs, there's some people's names, of course, but then there's animals and so on. So I'm really interested in how cities name radiate, as they have growth rings like a tree. So sometimes a lot of suburbs, I grew up in Edmonton and Calgary, particularly in Calgary, they are very inoffensive and very afraid, But you go to a place like Europe and you can walk through there and someone could tell you the whole history, right? Or New York or someplace. I would love to live in a city where you could go on walking tours and just by the street names evoke all these important events and so on. That's a mature city, I would say. I don't know if that quite answered your question. So let me talk about the resistance side first. Like I said, I've got skin in the game, right? I've got a family. I grew up in a city. You were talking about, where are you? Talking about being recognized. Growing up in a city where there was a Garno neighborhood was amazing. I felt like a king. No, I felt like that, well, that means something, so I could ask questions about what does this mean? The plaques never said he was Métis, but he was the person who was there. I had some roots in the ground. That was significant growing up. Imagine not having that. Imagine that the city is only settler European, particularly British people, or French. I mean, that says something. Our demographics are changing utterly, so of course there will be change. How much do you want to hold on to? How much do you want? That is a question for the present. The things with names, the things that go into museums, that is a past, our ancestors, wishing something for the future, imposing something on us, and we chose to take some and not. But there's a lot of anxiety, because some of those things are wise, and we don't want to throw them away. And so if there's a collective understanding that a particular person was toxic, and not really a person we'd want to emulate, and there's a better choice. Now this is the key. You have to have a competing narrative that is stronger than the first narrative. Okay, so for instance, I'm interested in how things are collected in museums. And you go to southern Alberta, to Glenbow and Calgary in southern Alberta, and they had all sorts of Blackfoot things in there. And after this event in 1988, the government said, well, yeah, there's a rough client, wife was Métis, by the way, said, yeah, take them back. And they said, whoa, we don't want it all back. We want some of our stuff to be in safekeeping there. And so it wasn't just a take back, no, that some of it's wise to be kept in there, some of it we'll take back. Okay, so we negotiate with each of these things. But at the time, the master narrative was that anthropologists, ethnographic folks particularly, felt that all these good things made by Indigenous people should be saved for mankind. We didn't include Indigenous people, by the way. And now that humankind includes Indigenous people, and they have a say in what's collected and how it's taken care of, everything's changed. I'm shocked myself. I don't know what it's like up here. Oh yes, I do. Michelle Jakes is head of the REMI, an African diaspora woman. The head of the Mackenzie, the most important art institution, is an Indigenous man. I mean, the place is changing and people aren't rioting in the streets. And why? Because the new master narrative is actually truer, more appropriate. We're comfortable with it. And so, times that I have debated around the John A. Macdonald, I said, give me the reasons why he should maintain his status in this location, right? And we'll hear the narratives. Very good stories. I totally get it. Great. Now, here's another narrative, what we're going to place him with. We need not just to have a blank slate, we need to replace it with something. Is it going to be a living garden? And from an Indigenous point of view, those sites that are sacred to us are the ones that we visit. No one's visiting John A. and laying something at his feet. They don't care anymore. They move him to another place, inoffensive, some back down somewhere, whatever. Museum, that would be fine. But we want something that will be honoring who we are now. Not just as Indigenous people, but as real human beings.
When you talked about that you wish the walking tour would let you see what the names of the streets were,
Yeah.
I had actually suggested to the city that, and that time I think I was thinking QR code, but now they have
Yeah.
augmented reality.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if you go up to a street and either hit either QR code or the augmented reality, I like that backstory here about, why was it called the John A. Macdonald Road before, etc. And I like in Winnipeg how they left the ugly statue of Riel up with the good one,
Yeah.
because the juxtaposition really shows that shift of people's thinking.
And see, artists. Cheryl Rondell, I think it's been 10 years ago, did these bus tours through through Regina, that also ended up at the Indian residential school, the industrial school, that people didn't know about. Right? So artists often lead the way. There are other artists that do audio tours. So yeah, that is definitely a way of doing it. There's so much you said there. One of them is that, we were people that kept our heads down for a very long time. And now we are raising our heads up. I wanted to say, part of what made me upset about the John A. statue too is that there isn't one anywhere else in Saskatchewan, just at the place that he was hung. There isn't one in Alberta. There isn't one in mainland BC. There was one in Victoria, but when the First Nations there said they were upset about it, they took it away. There isn't one in Manitoba. There isn't one in all of Western Canada, but why in 1967 would the citizens decide to honor John A.? It's a provocation to First Nations and especially Métis people to put the executioner there in the middle of town, right? It's to keep your head down, to keep you quiet. I don't know if you all heard, but it was about the RCMP Museum having a piece of the rope that hung Louis Riel, supposedly. The famous Métis artist Edward Poitras did a joke on that where you had these huge hundreds and hundreds of meters of rope suggesting that there were all these, that there was so much of it, everyone had to have it. But then why would people collect that, right? It's a trophy. It's a trophy. So this is why I say, we have to come up with counter narratives that are stronger. But I also want to pick up a point you're saying about speaking up in these sites. So the Tuatana Bridge that a team of myself, I designed them all, and I painted about half of them, but I had 12 other people helping me. There are 544 paintings. Many of them have Métis themes up there on that bridge, right in the middle of town. And when I met with the Métis Nation, Audrey Griever and that, they didn't believe me that this was going to even happen. We still have our head down. Did this thing, but the most important thing is none of the stories are written down. So I did tours back in May, and I'll do them every year, I hope. And I want to get other people that I'll teach the stories to, and First Nations and Métis elders there to teach the stories, so that it'll only be passed on through the body of people. We have to be there speaking of the statue's not good enough, the painting's not good enough, the street sign's not good enough. We need to bring it to life. Change people. I was shocked, so I did this performance, how many people saw it? I think there were 75 people there, and later it was on CBC and all that. That's all great. But then the city asked for feedback. And I gave an account, and I described what I described to you. And for them, the feedback I got from them was how emotional it was, that they were moved by my feeling. And yet, as a very analytic person, it struck me as I felt embarrassed about talking about my feelings. But when I would avoid that park, I'd feel horrible about being in that place. I didn't feel like Regina could be home, that I could home that land with that presence there. And that had an effect on them. And so if people are giving as part of their counter-narrative how they feel when they see John and MacDonald name on there, that it's not relevant. He didn't come here. He never came here, right? The Métis stories are far more interesting than of that person who's so long in the history. But I think that each person has a part to play. For me, I feel comfortable. If I'm an artist, I'll just make the art. If I'm a prof, like I am now, doing a talk, being invited to do that, that's another role. But then to go and do the policy and all that stuff, that, man, is not me. I was on the shared management board. I was the chair at Batoche, and I loved to, come up with ideas, and we're moving things around, and then how are you going to buy that bus and the insurance? And it's like, so we each have our own skills. But if there was a committee formed that saw that they wanted to indigenize this place, and it was made up of not just Indigenous people, that would go a long way, right? I wouldn't call it indigenization. I would say it's a form of conciliation or reconciliation.
And myself, we sit with the city, we've got a committee going through with status and non-status and Métis, and we have newcomers who are Canadians who came in. I felt that was important because children will be coming. We got to look at the tomorrows. We're not all going to be here forever. So for me, I wanted just to say that we had that opportunity, and we have it. It was really good, and it's still going on, and we're still working on that. There's a lot of work to be done. And when I hear, I have to give credit to these people that have come together and we sit together with them. And there's a lot of good things coming to Saskatoon in the future.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. At the beginning of the whole TRC reconciliation talk, the imaginary was that it was Indigenous people on one side and Euro-Canadians on the other. And a group that I was with, a university group about 8 years ago, we decided to rethink that right from the beginning and concentrate on a relationship between newcomers coming from other than European centers and First Nations and Métis people. And it changed our minds, right? Imagine trying to explain John A. to someone coming here wanting to make this place their home without the emotional baggage, or, it becomes a very different tale. And so if you imagine future people, not just people living now, that's the key, I think, for all of this. Who is it we want to be as real human beings? And what are our strategies for getting there? It's not an us versus them. It's a collective enterprise.
We'll just take one more question.
Okay?
Maybe I missed it. If I did, I apologize. curious what you named your performance and why. And if you didn't name your performance, is it because you didn't consider it art? Because I personally do.
So I try to be consistent, and so it had a title. It was called Dear John, comma, Louis David Riel, and it was sponsored by the Dunlop Art Gallery, so I was part of the art world. Whereas my previous gestures of laying the nooses on the ground, I didn't consider art. It was a form of grieving or something, and that's what struck me as it was. Like I say, I'm a pretty analytical person, but it was an emotional response. And then to be able to reify it as a work of art, and later, after the performance, which was like 30 below, we were freezing, we met in the library. It was the conversation afterwards, people bringing up all their thoughts and feelings. That went beyond art, right? That's something way more transformative, and that's had me rethink my practice. You know, as a painter, it's very much confined to the art world, but something like this, it's even more than art. Anyways, thank you very much for your attention and care.
Well, thanks so much to all of you for coming, for engaging in the conversation. I want to say another huge thank you to the Broadway Theatre for being a partner on this event, and to the City of Saskatoon. We also have people in the community that support other Reconciliation Saskatoon activities, so I want to acknowledge them. The Saskatoon Community Foundation, Sask Culture, Nutrien, SGI Canada, and Affinity Credit Union. And we have more partners too. We are organizing the Walk for Reconciliation on September 30th this year, so pay attention in the fall. But in the meantime, just another huge thank you to you, David, for driving up from Regina and being here with us today and sparking the conversation, so thank you. Your call to action now is to get active in your community. When these things are happening, the City of Saskatoon announced that they are renaming John A. Macdonald, and they're deep in engagement with community right now, doing that work. Be a voice of support for that work. They get a lot of voices, naysayers. Be the voice of support. So I'm leaving you with a little call to action, and there's also in the lobby, Know Your Roots maps. This was a collaboration between Reconciliation Saskatoon and the Saskatoon Public Library that we did a few years ago, and there's a lot of sites, commemorative sites, named sites in our city that you might be interested in. And there's also postcards for ConnectR, a tool we built to help you find and respond to calls to action and move forward in your own journey. So thank you for being here. Have a great day.